So I decided to do my project over cool season or warm season perennial grasses. Um, I'm kind of basing this off of what would be best for the type of animals that you're trying to feed or your different land types or climate situations and everything that kind of factors into which would be easier for you to grow and ultimately feeding to your animals. So, a little background on the topic. Farmers every day have to make decisions about if they're going to plant a warm season or a cool season grass, which is going to be best for the land, going back to, if they have sandy soil or clay soil, you can only grow certain types of grasses on certain types of soils, and then, the water holding capacity of that soil and the nutrients available in that soil, everything kind of comes into play whenever you're talking about what you can grow. You can also plant legumes with your forage crops. These are going to add, some extra digestibility and some extra nutrients and, will all around make it to where it's a better hay for you to feed or just a better pasture for you to give to your animals. These are better and easier to mix with different kinds of crops, and it just depends on what's easier and best for you. You want to think about what's going to give you your highest yield and what's going to be the most digestible for your animals. If you're not producing enough of that certain grass, then you're not going to have enough to feed your livestock. Or, if they're not able to digest it properly, they're not getting those nutrients that they need from that forage crop, and then what's the point of even feeding it to them? So all of these grasses that I'm going to go over today are going to be perennial grasses. This means that they have rhizomes and stolons. These are basically just stems that are going to grow below or above the ground that allow the plant to basically asexually propagate itself, to reproduce, without needing the seeds and the fruit and everything like that go along with pollination and everything. It's just able to create smaller plants from the mother plant. So each of these plants that I'm going to talk about have different cultivars. They're going to be different types. They've been developed for different regions, and you really need to make sure that if you're going to plant one of these grasses that you're planting the cultivar that goes along with where you are located. So, you can look up that stuff, or there's certain people that you can call and they're able to tell you exactly what cultivars you need to grow. They're also all going to have different crude protein amounts, different cold or heat tolerance, and different yields. So you need to look at that too. If it gets very cold in your area and you try to pick a cultivar that just doesn't have any cold tolerance whatsoever, it's just going to end up dying, and then that's just money that you use to basically have dead grass. Also, different cultivars are going to be better for your livestock. They're going to go back to, having higher crude protein or better digestibility and stuff like that. All of that's going to help your livestock develop more properly, and they're going to be, just overall just better cattle. So the warm season perennials is what I'm going to go over first. You're going to plant these typically the beginning of the year, around March or April typically, and they're going to grow all throughout the summer, and it'll end up going dormant during the winter because they are perennial grasses, so they will come back again next year. Those rhizomes that are underneath the soil will come back, and they will produce new grass. So all of these grasses are going to tolerate different conditions and everything like that. So these are going to be a little more heat tolerant. They're meant to be going through the summer and having to deal with, especially here in Texas with us having such a high heat, they have to be able to stand up to that, or you're going to have dead grass. They also do well on different soil types, from sand to clay. We have a lot of sandy soils around here, and all of these grasses will grow in our area, so they're all well adapted to that sandy natured soil. So the warm season perennials that I went over were Dallas grass, Bermuda grass, and Bahia grass. They're all very heat tolerant. They all have a high digestibility, but if you grow the crop for too long and you don't cut it whenever it's younger and especially before the seed head has popped out, it's going to become old and basically lignified is what it's called. So it's going to basically become so mature that it's not going to be as digestible and it's not going to have as many nutrients. So it does have a high digestibility as long as you don't wait too long to cut it. All of these grasses also have a very high yield, but the problem with warm season perennial grasses is that if you have a drought, your yield is going to decrease. So, the lack of water is going to basically stress out your plants, and it's going to make it to where you're not going to get as much biomass out of those plants. So here I have a few pictures of the different grasses I went over. So the top left is going to be the Dallas grass. It's going to grow in a clump like that. And you can see basically all of the stems coming out from one single spot. The top left, I have the Bermuda grass, which you can see in that picture is one of the stolons that are basically creeping across the ground. That's going to be shooting up new leaves, new little sprigs and everything, basically creating another plant. Down at the bottom is going to be your Bahia grass. You can see how tall it is. It produces a lot of biomass, and in the end, that's going to be better for your cattle. So the cool season perennials, you're going to plant these typically in the fall time around October, and they're going to go all through the winter, and they'll end up, getting a little too hot in the beginning of the year after, and will end up going to dormant until the next year again. These are the ones that are going to be good for adding legumes to. It's going to increase the quality of it, so if you mix it with like some clover or alfalfa or whatever is good for your region, it's just going to add to your crude protein and to your digestibility, and it's going to make it to where it's better for your animals. These grasses, however, though, have a problem with grazing. If they are overgrazed, then you're not going to be able to produce that biomass anymore. The shorter that you go on the plant, the more likelihood you're going to have to where that plant can't come back from it. So you really need to put your animals on rotational grazing whenever doing stuff like this to make sure that they aren't eating the grass all the way down to the ground. The cool season perennials that I went through were tall fescue, prairie grass, and Kentucky bluegrass. These are really good in horse pastures, especially the Kentucky bluegrass. They have the right kind of characteristics that go along with the horse's digestive system, with it being a little more different than, your goats or your sheep or even your cattle. All of these plants are going to need a little bit more fertilization, so that's something to think about, the fact that it's going to be a little more expensive if you're having to add more fertilizer to those plants to make it to where the nutritive value is where you want it. But they also have a cold and a heat tolerance. So typically they're going to go all through the winter. Those freezes come along and it's not going to kill back your grass. But it can also survive a little bit into the spring and summertime, and the fact that it has a little bit of that heat tolerance too. So here are the pictures of the 3 different grasses I went through with the cool season. The top left is going to be your tall fescue. You can see that it is very, very tall, but it also has those really big seed heads on it. The cattle aren't really going to enjoy the seed heads as much, so you're going to want either to chop those off or to not graze it whenever those seed heads are starting to pop up. Your top right is going to be your Kentucky bluegrass. This is a lot of a shorter grass. It's a little bit darker, but it's also going to have a little bit more nutrients in it. And then the one below is going to be our prairie grass. You can see how wispy and nice it is. It has very small seed heads on it, so that's not as much of a problem. And it also is going to create a higher biomass like the tall fescue will. So the solutions that I see in this is going to be, it's really going to be most beneficial for you to grow both at the same time. So if in the spring you can plant your warm season perennials and grow them throughout the summer, and then seed in your cool season in the fall and have those growing through the winter, you're going to have forage that's around for your animals for the entire year and not have to worry about buying hay. But that is also a solution as well. You can compensate with hay during the winter. So let's say during the summer you're only growing your cool season perennial grasses and you don't want to deal with any of the legumes or the cool season perennials, so you go out and buy hay. And that's really good, as long as there's not any mold growing and it was dried properly and everything. Hay is a very good alternative. It's just it can get expensive depending on how many animals you're trying to feed throughout the winter. So in conclusion, just make sure that you're looking at the nutrient requirements of all the different grasses, making sure that they're going to grow well in your area, and that you're not going to really have any problems. You know, the more problems that you have, the more it's going to cost, or the more likelihood that you aren't going to be able to feed your animals. Tolerance of climates is really big. If you're trying to grow a grass that cannot grow in your area, you're just not going to have any luck with it. You know, some are more tolerable to further up north versus down here in the south. Price is also a big factor. It is very expensive to seed acres and acres of land. And so looking to see which one is going to be in your price range, especially when thinking about fertilization. You know, if you're having to add a bunch of extra fertilizer to it, then, you know, it's just the price is going to keep going up. So, you know, in conclusion, it's up to the farmer, but these are some good ideas to think about.